Pablo Martinez, it's a real privilege to have you with us here today to talk on this subject of solid love in a liquid society. I'm really intrigued, but it's all about nourishing our marriages. A lot of people will feel they know you already. You're a member of the Forum Steering Committee. You have been one of the leaders of the European Christian Counselors Network for several years now. You're the author of 3 different books. You've been a Bible teacher in over 30 countries. You've led the Spanish Evangelical Alliance. And so you've had a long involvement in working with evangelicals throughout Europe and further afield. But perhaps most importantly today is that you're also the husband of one wife, of Marta. Right. And so you're coming to us with a background also as a psychiatrist practicing, but with all this other personal and experience and knowledge as well. So we're very grateful for your time. And perhaps we could just start off by asking you how you would characterize the understanding of love in our society. Love is one of those words that's in the Bible that is still in contemporary usage, but it seems to have a very different meaning today. So how would you characterize it in our society today?
I would say that the emphasis is very much on feelings. The feeling love is what permeates everything. And this is why I use the expression liquid love instead of solid love. The sociologist Zygmunt Bauman uses the expression a liquid society in the sense that everything keeps changing all the time. Nothing remains steadily fixed, solidly. And I think this is one of the main threads of love in our days. I love you today, but I don't know if I will love you tomorrow. So this uncertainty, this insecurity has to do with the fact that love is almost entirely based on feelings. It's just one dimension of love, as we'll probably see later, because love is much wider than just feelings. You cannot trust feelings because they keep changing all the time. I would say this is the first characteristic. The second one is that it's very selfish. We live in a very individualistic society. Individualism has risen very, very much in the last 20 years. And the me first generation is today, it's permeating the idea of love. Me first. My rights, my right to be happy, my right to be myself, and this is the excuse to do everything in your relationships. The important thing is my right, my right. So the me is in the center. I would say these are the 2 main characteristics of today's love in society. The great emphasis on feelings and also this selfishness, this individualism. And that has brought forth a big crisis in the columns of love that we had so far.
So this is why you call it liquid, because emotions and feelings are so changeable from one moment or day to the next.
Exactly.
And it being all about the self, because it's about my self-gratification, my feeling good, that love is there for me.
Exactly.
So how does this concept of love based on emotion and the self differ from the biblical understanding of love?
I always like to compare the biblical concept of love to a building. Actually, Psalm 127 says that God builds the house, the family. A building, you need first a foundation. The foundation, a solid foundation. And the foundation is the covenant. Marriage is a covenant. It has a solid foundation.
And by a covenant, what do you mean by covenant?
Covenant is much more than an agreement. It's much deeper. An agreement, it's just something subjective, something that has a deadline. But a covenant is something deeper.
So it's a permanent promise or
It's
commitment. Yeah.
a permanent promise. This is why the love that we read in the Bible is solid, in the sense it's like a firm, uh, rooted tree that does not easily is not easily broken. So first it has a foundation, then it grows through intimacy, and finally it leads to faithfulness. So covenant, love that grows, and then finally it leads to faithfulness. I think it's very, very difficult to find a faithful relationship unless it is sustained by this kind of love that is faithful.
And yet people are looking for faithful relationships, aren't they? So if love, as you've described it, with that strong foundation, growing through intimacy and with the fruit of faithfulness, is what love is all about, then what's the biblical understanding of marriage, and how does it relate to that biblical love?
Yeah. Um, I think marriage in the Bible has also, well, I like to compare it to a triangle, a triangle that has three sides. First, you have acceptance. Acceptance is very important within marriage. And all these ingredients, all these three elements remind us of the way God has treated and designed us. God has accepted us. So we are called to accept our partner also in marriage. So one of the symptoms of love is mature acceptance. Now, acceptance does not mean agreeing with in everything. Acceptance means not trying to change the other person into our image, a kind of photocopying
Of ourselves.
yeah. So acceptance would be the first one.
Yeah.
Second ingredient is communication. If we see the Trinity, or we imagine the Trinity, we see communication. The Father talking to the Son to the Father. There is constant interaction and communication. So if God intended us to be in His image, we need our marriage to have communication. So acceptance and communication at all levels. Communication at all levels. Verbal communication, gestures, attitudes, physical communication, also spiritual communication. Prayer is very important in a marriage relationship. So acceptance, communication, and I think these two finally lead naturally, spontaneously to the third one, which is trust, confidence. When you accept each other, when you nourish your relationship with communication, you end up trusting each other. And trust is the best antidote against fear or anxiety. Where there is trust, there is no fear.
As the Bible says, perfect love casts out fear. So a love which provides the foundation for marriage, as you say, has got to have acceptance,
Yeah.
communication, and trust.
Yeah.
But in terms of getting practical, because it's not an uncommon problem, and this happens among Christians as well, that the feeling, if you like, of being in love, that feeling of intimacy that makes it easy to serve and to do good things for the other person. What happens when that dies and that inclination is no longer there anymore? Because many people will experience this at some stage in their marriages. Some marriages it will lead them to end. So how can we, as pastors, as counselors, as just friends wanting to help others, how can we help someone who's feeling like that the magic's gone, that the feeling's no longer there?
I think it's important to know and to remember that being in love is much more than the bliss from the beginning. I think it's a misconception to reduce being in love to a mere emotion, especially to the original emotion, to the first emotion when the relationship began. Many people say, I don't feel anymore what I used to feel at the beginning of the relationship. Now, the experts tell us that this original dimension of falling in love lasts for about 2, 3, maximum 4 years.
Okay.
Just chemistry.
Okay.
But this does not
And when
mean...
you say chemistry, are you saying that there is a biochemical basis to
Right.
this feeling that we feel of attachment, that the feeling that your partner can do nothing wrong and that they
Yeah.
are absolute perfection in your eyes?
Yeah.
That there's a biochemical element to that.
Yes, it can be described in terms of biochemistry. But the fact that the original version of falling in love does not exist anymore, it does not mean that romantic love has disappeared. Not at all. Romantic love continues to express and to show in different ways. And in this sense, I like to compare romantic love to a river. The river, in the first part, when it comes from the spring of water, it goes very quickly, then much more quietly, and by the end, when it gets to the seaside, it's very, very, very quiet. It's the same river, exactly the same river, and yet it has changed the way it is expressed. The water is the same, but the river has changed. I would say that with romantic love is the same. Romantic love can continue for many, many years, but it is childish to pretend that you will be able to experience the same you had in the very beginning. The
Do
two,
you mean that same intensity of
exactly,
feeling
the same intensity,
when a couple first
or even the
fall
same
in love?
quality. It's different. It's just different. Yes.
So if people are saying we seem to have fallen out of love, we seem to have lost that, how can that strength of bond be reignited again for a couple where it no longer seems to be there, or for one member, husband or wife, who seems to have lost it?
That's an important question. Love can indeed be reignited because love is much more than a feeling. Love is a willingness. Love is a decision. Love is friendship. So love can be nurtured in many different ways. There are basically 4 dimensions in love. One is the feeling, the attraction, but the other dimensions are also equally important. The friendship element, the relationship, the feeling, when you are well with the other person, getting alongside, enjoying conversations. And there is also the agape love, which is the willing the best for the other person. And the agape love is a decision. It's important to remember that agape love does not require previous positive feelings. This is why I can love my enemies, because
So,
I'm not...
so this is much more of an unconditional love,
Exactly.
much more like the love of God himself.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. So it's friendship, it's agape love, it's affection. All this is love too. And if you want to reignite your love, you have to start practicing these other dimensions of love, which reignite the fire.
So you were saying there were 4 dimensions: the feelings, the friendship, the agape unconditional love,
And the affection.
and the affection.
And the affection.
And what do you mean by affection as opposed to feelings?
The affection
Because many people, I think, would equate the two.
The affection is that natural, even somehow mysterious link, bond that you develop with another person. Actually, affection is um, not only appears in relationship with humans. You can have affection towards a cat or a dog, a different kind of affection. It's a strong link. It's a mysterious link that makes that you miss the other person when he or she is not present or when he or she dies. This is affection.
Now, you started off by saying that the whole process of falling in love or having these strong, intense feelings for another person, it is in part the Lord's made us with biochemistry, which enables us to have those things. But you use the word superficial or shallow to describe it. How can we help love to grow throughout the course of a marriage so that it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger as the years go on? We see these couples in their 70s or 80s who seem still to have such a strong bond. How can we help our marriages to grow in ways like that?
There are many ways we can do this, but I would say I always like to, when I'm with my patients, I like to give them 3 practical ways. First, your presence is very important. Being alongside, being together, be there in the right moment. Being there is very important. Your presence. The best gift you can give your spouse is not flowers nor chocolates, but it's you, your presence. So being together, being alongside at certain moments is very, very important. That sense of I always remember when Lazarus died, Martha and then Mary rebuked Jesus for not being there. Had you been there, our brother would have not died. Okay? The importance of being there in the right moment. Many marriage start crisis when the spouse is not there when it is needed. Moments of grief, moments of joy, anniversaries, special celebrations. One of them is missing away. That is not good at all. So being there,
So being present is
being
the first.
present is very important. Secondly, spirit of serving the other. The antidote of selfishness is service. So thinking of you first is a great expression of love. You first, which is in contrast with the me first love that we mentioned in the beginning. You first. What can I do for you? So first, being there, being alongside, being present. Second, what can I do for you? And thirdly, being ready to cope with difficulties together, overcoming trials, suffering together. I always say that the best relationship is not the one that they quarrel less, they fight little, but the best relationship is when the spouses take very little to reconcile. They reconcile
Very
quickly.
quickly.
So this is the best relationship. Don't take time to reconcile. Be ready to cope with difficulties together. I think this would be the 3 ways to reignite the marriage and to keep it functioning.
So presence, being there, service, doing things for the other
Service, the spirit
person,
of service,
and
and
then
being
facing
ready
difficulties together and being able to resolve
Yeah.
difficulties quickly. So not that we don't have problems or even major disagreements, but that we quickly move to
Yeah.
resolve them. So,
Yeah.
so let's move on. A lot of people now will equate love with intimacy, and particularly sexual intimacy as well. So what is the proper understanding of intimacy within marriage from a Christian or biblical perspective?
That's a good question too. Many people reduce intimacy to physical intimacy. And I would say physical intimacy is important, but it's just one dimension. Um, Intimacy in marriage should be global, holistic intimacy. So it's not just a matter of having two bodies united, becoming one flesh, but it's also two souls, two spirits, two persons being united.
Two minds.
Two minds, exactly. So I would say the first consideration is that intimacy should not be only physical, but global. It's really remarkable to notice how many times sexual problems, sexual dysfunctions have to do with relationship problems. So when the relationship improves, then the sexual dysfunctions disappear. I always say that sexual intimacy is like the dessert of a good meal.
Okay.
Unless you have a good meal, you don't have a good dessert. So it's a preparation. So I think it's important that we understand that intimacy is global intimacy that should be nurtured through the dimensions we mentioned some time ago at communication, trust, and all these dimensions.
So an intimacy of the whole person. Now, as Christians, we talk about the love of God, to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, to love our neighbor as ourselves, that God is love, that God exists in Trinity with love between all the persons. How can an understanding of the love of God help us in showing love and being loving within marriage?
Because every human being has the common grace. Every human being is able to love. But I would say that
so whether they're a Christian believer or not, people,
but Christians are the best equipped people to love because we have the agape love, which is the fruit of the Spirit. I think in this sense, the fruit of the Spirit, that is love, is what nurtures this faith that makes love grow and ultimately leads to faithfulness, as we said in that building, that triangle in the beginning. For me, it's striking that when Jesus summarizes the Ten Commandments in two, he says in the second place, and you will love your neighbor as yourself. But first, the requisite is you will love God, first of all, with all your mind, all your strength, all your soul, etc. So the love for God and of God is the driving force that gives us the ability to love our neighbor, including our spouse. This is why the foundation of loving our neighbor is the love of God. The order is very, very important.
So God's love gives us the power to love others.
Exactly.
But how, to what extent should we be patterning our love for our spouse on the love of God? Does it provide, to what extent does it provide us with a pattern to follow?
I think the way God treats us is like a mirror of the way we should treat our spouse. For example, the covenant, the importance of the faithfulness for God. God is a faithful God. God established a relationship with mankind as in terms of a covenant, with his people, a covenant. And in the same way, we should have a covenant, as we said, a permanent love. Then closeness, the way that God has come to us through Christ, close to us, living within us in that supreme empathy that is Christ within us, is empathy with capital letter. This kind of empathy is what we should express, show towards our spouse. And also, I think the example of Christ's forgiveness and repairing all that needs to be repaired, reconciliation, in all these practical ways, God's love urges us to love our spouse.
Now, it's a sad fact that many marriages don't last, and even Christian marriages that seem to start out well might end after some decades even. So what is essential? What is the key to maintaining a strong and healthy marriage through the decades as life goes on, so that we are even stronger and fresher in old age? What are the keys?
I would summarize that in 3 suggestions, in 3 sentences. Give your spouse, give as much as possible, think as good as possible, think of her or of him as good as possible, think the best, and pray as often as possible. Give as much as possible, think of her or him as good as possible, Philippians 4:8, all the positive, all that is good, noble, great, positive, those things. Put your thoughts in these things, and then pray as often as possible. I think I cannot think of a better summary to prevent crisis in marriage, because this affects all the dimensions of our personality: the will, giving, the spiritual part, praying, the mental, the cognitive thinking. It's a holistic approach. And I think the marriages that God wants should be established on this threefold column that I've just mentioned.
Give as much as possible, think of well as possible, and pray as much as possible. The will, the
spirit,
mind,
yeah,
and the spirit,
yeah.
as well together. Pablo, thank you very much for your time, and we do wish you all the best in your very important ministry.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.